Okay, so let's jump right into one of the biggest, most personal questions you could ever ask. Who are you? Really? We all like to think of our identity as this solid fixed thing, right? But what if it's not? What if yourself is actually a story you're telling yourself? Let's get into it.
I want you to just take a second and actually think about that. I don't mean a list of facts, where you were born, the schools you went to, your job. Think about it like a novel. And you're the main character. It's got twists and turns, good guys and bad guys, moments of triumph and total failure. How does that story go?
This life story we all have playing in our heads, it actually has a name in psychology. It's called your narrative identity. It's this ongoing, constantly evolving tale that you create to tie your past, your present, and your future all together into one coherent thing. It's basically how our brains make sense of all the random chaos of life and find some kind of meaning in it.
And this, right here, is where things get really deep. Is this story you tell yourself the real you? Like an actual, essential truth at your very core? Or is it just a convenient fiction, a useful illusion that your brain cooks up just to help you get through the day? Let's dig into the first big argument.
So, first up, we've got the idea that your identity literally is the story you create. This whole perspective says that the self isn't something you go out and find like buried treasure. It's something you actively build day by day through storytelling.
The philosopher Paul Ricoeur was a huge proponent of this. His whole thing was that we aren't just sitting in the audience watching our lives unfold. Nope. We are the authors. We're the ones constantly taking all these separate events and memories and feelings and weaving them together into a single unified story. For him, the self doesn't exist before the story, it actually comes into being through the act of telling it.
And here's kind of how that works. Psychologists have this great term for it, employment. It just means you take all the raw data of your life and you arrange it into a plot. So think about a bad breakup from your past. You could tell that story as a total tragedy, right? A story of loss. Or you could frame it as a crucial lesson, a turning point that helped you grow. Same facts, totally different plot. And by doing that, you connect the person you were back then with who you are today and who you want to be tomorrow. It gives you a sense of purpose. You are the protagonist.
So, to put it as simply as possible, from this point of view, the self isn't some pre-existing thing that the story is about. The self is the story. Your identity is just that continuous act of narration that holds you together.
But what if that's all wrong? There's another, completely different way to look at this. And it's pretty radical. What if this unified self that we work so hard to create doesn't actually exist at all?
This slide lays out the two sides perfectly. On one side, you've got Ricoeur's idea, we are our story. But on the other side, you've got thinkers like the philosopher David Hume, who argued that no, we just construct a story to make sense of what's really just a jumble of disconnected experiences. Hume's bundle theory is a real mind-bender. He said, look, if you try to look inward to really find that core you, you're never going to find it. All you'll ever find is a constantly shifting stream of perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and sensations. There's no single permanent you holding it all together. There's just the bundle. And more modern thinkers like Daniel Dennett have built on this. He came up with this amazing metaphor. He calls the self a center of narrative gravity. Think about it. An object's center of gravity isn't a physical part of the object, right? It's just an abstract point. But it's super useful for predicting how that object will move and behave. Dennett says our self is just like that. A fictional point that we create to organize our life story around. It's an illusion, yeah, but a really, really useful one.
So, to sum up the second argument, the self isn't some real thing you discover. It's more like a brilliant piece of software that our brains created, a story we tell ourselves so we can make sense of the world and function in it. It feels totally real, but at the end of the day, it's a fiction.
Okay, so we've got these two really powerful competing theories. But what happens when we stop talking philosophy and start looking at the real world? What happens when the actual physical machinery in our brain that tells the story starts to break down?
And this question is what takes us out of the philosophy department and straight into neurology. And the evidence we find there is, well, it's pretty unsettling. Because if our identity really does depend on our ability to tell a coherent story, what happens when that ability is gone?
Well, you can look at conditions like dementia. As a person loses their memories, which are the literal building blocks of their life story, the narrative just unravels. That feeling of being a continuous person, connected to a past and a future, it can dissolve. Or you can look at a strange condition called anosognosia, where a person is literally unaware of their own physical or mental deficits. Their mind will invent these bizarre, fractured stories to explain why they can't do something, which shows just how hard the brain works to keep a story going even when it's failing.
What all these tragic cases really drive home is just how vital that storytelling process is to our sense of who we are. Our self isn't some indestructible soul floating around in our heads. It's a fragile biological construction that completely depends on the healthy functioning of our brain.
Right, so this isn't just some abstract late-night dorm room debate. Whether our self is a real story or just a useful fiction has huge practical consequences. It completely changes how we think about things like personal growth and therapy, and even our own ethics. And this idea, it pops up everywhere. I mean, in literature, it's the basis of every memoir ever written. In neuroscience, scientists can actually see the part of your brain they call the default mode network light up when you're thinking about yourself, when you're daydreaming or remembering something or planning for the future. It's basically your brain's storyteller at work. But maybe the most powerful place we see this in action is in therapy.
Which brings us to something called narrative therapy. The whole idea here is that a lot of our problems are tied up in the negative or limiting stories we tell about our lives. So this form of therapy helps people see their problems as separate from themselves, and then it helps them literally re-author their life story. You learn to focus on different plot points, moments of strength, of resilience, to build a new, more empowering identity.
And this leads to a really fascinating ethical puzzle. If you can actively rewrite your personal story to make yourself the hero, are you being inauthentic? Are you just lying to yourself? Or, if the self is a construction anyway, are you just being a better editor? Are you just choosing to tell a story that serves you better? It's a tough one.
Which really brings us back to where we started. Whether our identity is real or an illusion, we experience it as a story. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If your life is a story, are you its author, with the power to decide what happens in the next chapter? Or are you just its reader, turning the pages to see what happens next? Thanks for tuning in.